Hey, everybody, welcome to the program. I'm going to start off real quick by welcoming my longtime friend, Oakland Post publisher Paul Cobb. Paul, thanks and for being here and reminding him and showing the audience something that we did way back, and for being here and reminding him and showing the audience something that we did way back in the great year. Well, it was great year primarily to November 1st, 2008. Unfortunately, we're also talking about the passing of Chauncey Bailey, but let me give you a taste of this great conversation we have to set up where we're going to go today and start momentarily. Here is our discussion as we started back then with Paul.
Okay. All right, sir. How we looking?
We're good.
Paul, Jorge gave me an excellent background on you, more than I know you marched with Martin Luther King.
Yeah.
And sat in jail with Martin Luther King.
Yep.
What? Let me ask you a dumb question.
You want to see a picture of me and Martin Luther King?
I would like to have it for the video. Yeah, actually. Yeah, absolutely.
Here's when I was 21 years old. There I am, and there's Martin Luther King.
This is Paul. This is can you see that mirror?
Bring it a little closer.
That's
Okay, that's
Paul there, and then Martin Luther King. Yeah, that's Paul and Martin Luther King. Okay, here, pause it.
I mean, I can send you an
great,
email, clearer picture if you want that.
Yeah, we got it close up. Who is the gentleman here? He looks familiar.
I forgot him.
He looks really familiar. I don't know. This is legendary.
yeah. If you could send us an email.
Yeah, that would be great.
That.
Yeah, definitely. Hey, how has that shaped your worldview? This experience.
I mean,
that's a dumb question, but
no, it is.
With you always getting
it has directed my path in almost everything I've done in terms of public participation, civic participation, political activities, social justice, environmental justice. The civil rights movement shaped my generation, but it really shaped my life directly. I remember when Emmett Till was killed, and I used to sell Jet magazines, and I remember that famous cover.
For those of you who know, just a black magazine that was actually published by me in Chicago at first, right?
Yeah, Johnson published it. The same guy that publishes Ebony. And they used to have another magazine called Tan.
Yeah.
And Bronze Thrills.
Whatever happened
and
to that
Sepia.
one?
Those were the magazines they had. And I used to sell those magazines as a kid, as a young teenager. But anyway, I got involved in the civil rights movement when I was at the Post, 1965. My first real journalistic assignment when I graduated from college. I went as a reporter for KDIA and the Post. I wound up not only covering the march, but I got designated as an usher. So I got a chance to physically walk beside Dr. King every day for the 7 days of the march. I had over 3 hours of exclusive one-on-one tapes with Martin Luther King, and we had a chance to talk in a way that most journalists never get a chance to talk to.
What was he like as a person?
Unbelievably smart. When he found out who my pastor was, he opened up and we started discussing theology and religion. And while we were actually walking, I remember various people would come up, "Doc, what are y'all talking about? We supposed to be doing this, this, and this." Well, Hosea Williams, the late Hosea Williams, who started Four Seasons, was a classmate of Martin Luther King at Boston University, and he was my pastor. In fact, Dr. Williams helped Martin do his studies because he was like 2 years ahead of him. And so when Martin found out that that was my pastor, you know, we really, we connected at a level that, you know, and so that has shaped me, and everything that I've done, I can trace back to the events of Selma and the Mississippi and Alabama and all those 11 southern states.
What would Dr. King say about, well, the debate starts, second debate tonight, but Senator Obama?
I'm going to stop right there, and because I think it's a great jumping off point here. But Paul, does that jog your memory?
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Yeah.
When you watch that, what goes through? I got to ask you, when you watch that, what goes through your mind? What comes to mind when you see that, presented, as it just now?
Well, a lot of things come to mind. The first immediate flash that came to mind as I was watching that, I was thinking, wow, it's a wonder that I'm here, because Viola Liuzzo, the white woman that was killed at the end of the march, she would offer rides to the marchers back to town, whether to shower or do whatever. And at the end of the march, I was offered a ride by her to go back to town. And I said, okay, it's getting close to being dark. She is a white woman, and I would be sitting in the passenger side of her driving down those lone country roads, and something street survivability clicked in my head, and I had to say, well, thanks, but no thanks. Half an hour later, she was killed. And I was thinking, by the grace of God, there would have been a possibility that I would have been caught up in that. And I was thinking, wow, how a lot of brushes with life and death occurred during that march that we did not realize. And when you're caught up in the euphoria of the mission, you often don't think about the dangers and the perils around you. So that was what was going through my mind as I was watching the situation. That was the immediate thought.
You realize that was 14 years ago.
No, that's more than 14 years ago.
Oh, no, I meant
the interview. Yes.
Right.
Sorry, yes.
Well, sorry about that. Yeah, I just must learn to speak more accurately. But where are we now?
Well, we made progress, but we've also began the process of regress. We've made progress in terms of public participation and Black electeds as a result of the focus of voting. Voting was our purpose in 1965 of our mission. Since then, thousands of African Americans have been elected every level in this country, both Black men, Black women, Hispanics, Asians, and Native Americans, and many others who hadn't been in public life or in government got a chance to move up and in the intricacies of government and decision making and policy making. But now that we are there, we've had a Black president, the country is realizing, whoa, is this what integration means? That we are going to have to follow the lead of people that don't look like us? And even though Barack Obama was mild-mannered in terms of he really didn't strike overt fear in the heart and in the lives of most white Americans, they saw the day coming that they mathematically, they meaning whites in general, would be the minority population. And that thought drove shudders and is driving shudders through the hearts of white America, which is behind this new upsurge and wave of overt racism and making us the other population that's the menace to their hopes. And therefore, it's showing itself either in Charlottesville, It's showing itself in all these new legislative attempts to roll back the clock and to roll back the time to just coming out of the Civil War and Reconstruction. They don't want us to vote because they know that if we vote, they will not likely get the leader that they want. And so that's where we are. And there's the need for an upsurge of civil rights, voting rights, and intersectional, interracial struggles for justice and equality that must occur both simultaneously and nationally, and more targeted directly locally. There are 19 states that are considered battleground states, but for Black people, all 50 states have been battleground states ever since we've been in this country. And other minority populations are now beginning to realize, especially around this whole issue of Asian hate and this anti-Semitic violence that just recently occurred in Colleyville. This is the time for the message of Dr. King and the civil rights movement to be front and center stage. And since we are doing this over the media, this discussion, Dr. King, you didn't ask me that, but I'm going to try to be an anticipatory journalist and ask the question for you. What would Dr. King say if he were here today and if he were alive? He would speak to those issues. He would speak to the issue of the need for an intersectionality thrust in civil rights and in human rights, and the push for equal justice around across the board.
Hey, how much of this also is fueled by a certain fear of integration? I say that because I have never seen society. I never thought I would see in American society, corporate America, advance commercials that show Black husband, white wife, vice versa, all kinds of mixes, Asian, Hispanic, and at a really a dizzying rate, so much that is now the norm, which really it should have been all along. But this development has only occurred over the past 3 years, and I think has really gone a long way toward defining, who and what we are as a country. But is that fueling this backlash among this minority of people who feel perhaps threatened, or and I'll give you another example to buttress on that before you answer. I'm here in suburban Atlanta, Georgia, belonged to a gym where a fellow was a rampant Trump supporter, loved to argue about it. And so we'd have these conversations that always threw him because he didn't know my background. But my point is, his daughter dated a Black guy and had a baby, and his entire focus changed to the baby and the son-in-law who's Black. And you could tell, and I didn't dig in with him about it, but you could tell his entire worldview was changed by the fact that he wanted to be a granddad. Okay. And all he saw was being a granddad, how much he loved this child, and by extension, his son-in-law who's Black. There's dynamics like that going on all around the country.
And all around the world.
All around the world.
Witness Meghan in British society.
Yeah. Which I think is, all this is like wonderful. Man, I remember Libby's father, who's my godfather, was saying, I don't think things are going to get better until we have black kids marrying white kids and all of us nicely mixed up. But is that frightening people now that it seems like we're at that point? What do you think?
Well, I think that has always frightened people, this whole notion of, quote, race mixing. But I think more so than just interracial marriages. And it, as my father used to say, at bottom, the white man will allow you to do almost anything. You can integrate lunch counters, you can intermarry, you can go sit next to someone in school. They will allow integration at every level. In my father's time, the term was allow. Nowadays, if my father was still living and given the advances, and my grandmother would say, they will tolerate. It's not about allowing, because that presupposes a certain power position in society, almost like what Richard Wright talks about in his book on the frog perspective. But they will tolerate integration at every level except one major level, and that is the money. You can integrate the bedroom, the kitchen, the school, the classroom, the workplace, but the last bastion of segregated power symbol is the bank account, the bank book, the money, the trust fund, anything that deals with economic transactions, business, because that's power. That symbolizes control. And at bottom, a lot of the racist reaction is one of a loss of power, a loss of control, a loss of the ability to influence things. When you stop and think about it, they're saying, can you believe this? We created a police force to be slave catchers. And now these Black people is not a Secretary of Defense. Can you imagine that? They control the guns. They control the defense of this nation. What is that? What does that make us? So from their perspective, a lot of them are reacting out of fear and the need for dominance and the need for control and the need to the feeling of superiority. And go ahead.
I was just going to ask, I couldn't help but think about the rise of cryptocurrency in this and also derivatives within that, because with derivatives, you can take a little bit of money and make a lot. Mm-hmm. And that's even threatening the cryptocurrency structure. I bring that up because we're seeing in a number of ways, small than large, the attack of traditional financial systems. And a lot of us African Americans are involved as cryptocurrency holders, even beyond Bitcoin, right? I mean, for an example, what I'm talking about. Remember Brian Parker, who ran for mayor? I went to a fundraiser for him at the Mars Bar, one of my favorite places in the Bay Area to go to in South San Francisco. And I didn't really know anybody. This is 2013 summer. And but a mutual friend of Brian and mine introduced me to another guy named Brian, who was talking about cryptocurrency, which was completely an esoteric term to me. This is 2013. And he says, yeah, I'm actually started a new company called Coinbase. And we talked about Bitcoin. He gave me my first Bitcoin. That person is Brian Armstrong, who's now one of the richest people in the world. Mm-hmm. And he gave me a currency that it was extremely volatile, but if I ever needed a little extra money, I'd, take out a little amount, I'd, make it right. And I'm thinking, wow, the possibilities for financial, personal financial solvency when you need it the most have been expanded many forward. And yet here comes Janet Yellen and the feds under President Biden seemingly doing everything they can to try to destroy cryptocurrency. So do we, as African Americans seeking financial stability and freedom, make of that in the context of what you're saying? And
what should we make of it?
Yeah.
Well, I guess if you want to get rid of cryptocurrency, you let a lot of Black folks become millionaires with it, and all of a sudden they'll find a way to regulate it out of existence, or if they can't squeeze control, they will try to seek a way. For example, marijuana guys were these street corner pharmacists who used to make a living out of selling marijuana to white folks who came in from the suburbs. But they would wind up going to jail for a minimum of 5 years, some 20 years, etc. Now they have realized that it's such a potential cash crop they legalized it and took over the industry. And the great street corner entrepreneurs who wound up going to jail, they deemed unnecessary to hire or to allow them to get a shingle and a cash register instead of standing on the corner, because they said that they were not sophisticated. They were sophisticated enough to sell it on the corner and to count, but they're not sophisticated enough to run an enterprise and to make decisions. And because there's a lot of money, white folks figured out how to gain control and write the rules in such a way, as the late Supervisor John George said, he who writes the rules controls the game. And they wrote the rules and wrote and ruled us out of competition or management or the prerogative to enjoy the fruits of that cash crop. That is not to say, I'm just using that as an example to show you how the script gets flipped in terms of when they want to control the economic flow.
If Dr. King were alive, would he be involved in, what would he say about Biden and Biden's attempt to attack not just cryptocurrency, but it seems that the slowness of aid toward Black Americans in the middle of the pandemic. I mean, where are we now politically? We've got, it seems, the Republicans on one side, the Democrats on the other, and we're sort of in the middle. Or are we? Or am I wrong? I'm happy to be wrong. I'm just trying to.
Well, I could see a Southern Christian Leadership commercial, thinking journalistically and graphically. I could see a full-page Dr. King ad saying, I have a dream that we should pursue victory through voting and vaccination. He would a three-pronged attack. He would say, we can be victorious if we vaccinate. In other words, we take care of our health and maintain a healthy lifestyle. We can achieve victory by voting. And voting is the foundation stone to democracy. Everything that we do, want, dream for, and seek, there is a voting decision-making foundation stone to that. If it's around education, voting. If it's around ending housing discrimination, voting. If it's around ending homelessness and dispersing wealth and job opportunities and life-sustaining resources, voting. He who decides through voting determines where and how the money flows in this society. So Dr. King would say to Biden, you know, it's wonderful to put the emphasis, this is my opinion, I'm not channeling every thought and idea of Dr. King just because I marched with him. That doesn't mean that I would know. But I think that his emphasis would be, it's wonderful to have a renewed interest in infrastructure, but voting is the infrastructure of democracy. So therefore, we should take care of voting so we can have the strength to make sure that the resources and the decisions around infrastructural dollars and building back better and the dispersal of resources and healthcare can be made. So that is, he would be in the White House saying to Biden, it's wonderful that you have Kamala and a Black vice president, but let's make sure that we can make sure that there will be Black governors, that there will be sensitive governors, there will be Hispanic leaders, there will be Asian leaders, Native Americans will come to the forefront. And the only way that we can guarantee that that kind of America is going to be in our future, if that dream to come true, we have got to underline it with the vote. And that he would be pushing for voting equality. He would say you need to have an attorney general, even though You're not using the bully pulpit to your own administrative staff to urge them to move with all deliberate speed on prosecuting those who flout the law and who try to change the Voting Rights Act. He would say, we need to prosecute those who are seeking to forge voting, and then turn around and use this reverse psychology approach to marketing their messages in the media by whenever they get ready to do something that is patently illegal, they will accuse Black folks of being the criminal while they themselves are doing it. Just like they said, we're trying to stop all these fraudulent activities while they're forging signatures.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're busy in the media, we being the media, following the shiny object of the glaring charge and the astounding claims that Trump is making, these trumped up charges, that we don't focus on the substance of what's going on. And it's almost like not even a sophisticated, a blatant media circus of a three-card Monte approach to hoodwinking the American public. So Trump is out there accusing, quote, Black people of fraudulent voting, and they are in the background cooking the books and trying to dump votes or to create votes in a very fraudulent manner. And the media, it does not focus on it. They're viewing it as a horse race. I wonder what Trump has said today. Oh, isn't that crazy? Or isn't that ridiculous? We've never heard that before, but they're not focusing on the solutions and the reaction. And I think King would call their attention to it. He would say, do you remember my speech from the Birmingham jail when I wrote to wake up white clergy in America to say, why aren't you speaking out on this? King would say, isn't it appalling, this great white silence? And while we're focusing on the white noise of Trump, we should be focusing on the white silence of the silent white majority of Americans who are sitting idly by and who are allowing Trump to get away with these trumped up charges.
Aren't you surprised? I am, that the whole Epstein issue hasn't washed over Trump like a tidal wave, considering how he has partied in the past and who he's been photographed with and his allegations of, doing weird things with models and all of that. How come, look, why is this guy still relevant? I know he was president, but he tried to overthrow our democracy, and there's this whole other information carafe of stuff he's done that's seemingly covered up. What is it that we're not doing to focus on that?
Well,
Focus on that.
The media and the Democratic spokespersons aren't reacting quick enough, and they are acting like spectators when we should view it as we should either be offense or defense in a sporting contest. We have the ball now. We should have an offensive plan that says we're going to take the play to them, not sitting back as spectators wondering what the next move is to be. And we are not reacting. Our leaders are not proposing alternative solutions. They're spending an inordinate amount of time commenting on how ridiculous Trump looks and how bad he makes them feel, rather than what are we going to do about it? Are we going to be organizing? Are we going to strategize? Are we going to propose legislative alternatives? Are we going to exercise economic boycotts? Just like Rosa Parks, when they found out that they couldn't sit in the front of the bus and were not treated with dignity, they said, we'll walk. And that was a form of an economic boycott. I foresee, after talking to some of my friends in the sports world, I foresee an immediate move. If they try to actualize this agenda to prevent us from voting, there are going to be a lot of high school athletes, both basketball and football, who are going to say, why should I go play for the University of XYZ that represents a state that won't let my mama vote. So if my mama can't vote, why should I play for you? So I think that there's going to be a lot of movement of people starting to look at historic Black colleges as sports alternatives, because why should I dignify the state of Alabama, the state of Georgia, the state of so-and-so, Tennessee, or wherever these reactionary voting procedures are being instituted? Why should I go play for them? And my people who are in those states can't vote or being denied an opportunity or an equal opportunity to have access to the polls. Why should I help glorify that state and its history? Why don't I go to a historic Black college? That doesn't mean you stop playing football, and I think the Congressional Black Caucus might start saying, okay, since we're now in a fight for our life, and since we must adopt the Jewish appeal message, never again, that we should say we are not going back to slavery, and we are going to unite with brothers and sisters and ask them to honor our alternative. Therefore, we want the Congressional Black Caucus to seek to have legislation to go to the NCAA to allow people to transfer at will to colleges or to schools in states that did not pass those laws. And they should say, we will only go play for a college or play for your schools, your state-sponsored schools, because there are a lot of historic Black colleges. Since I picked on Alabama and cited as an example, there's a historic Black college in Alabama. They could go play, or they could do like Deion Sanders is now the coach at Jackson State. And you're going to find that there are Black former pro athletes who are coaches at other Black colleges, historic Black colleges. And I think that you're going to see a pushback from Black America and around all kinds of ways, not only sports boycotting by seeking to go to a more hospitable place, but you're going to see it in business. And just like when at the first blush of what happened in Georgia, a lot of national corporations, you're there in Georgia, refused to participate in sporting events that were denying Blacks an equal opportunity.
Well, Major League Baseball took the All-Star game away.
Yeah, Major League Baseball took the All-Star game away. And I think that's what's going to happen. And so ironically, Kaepernick's stand has validity. He's turning out to be more pro-quote democratic and democracy oriented than some of the very people who criticized him. They're talking about tearing the country down. Kaepernick never said that. He just said that he didn't feel like kneeling as a gesture. My point is that this push of Republican control at any cost and any method, I think if Martin Luther King were here today, to get back to your question, if Martin Luther King were here today, he would speak to those issues with a clarion voice, just like he bravely spoke about the Vietnam War, and just like he bravely spoke about other issues, and just like he technically launched a renewed call for reparations. Because remember, his opening remarks at the March on Washington was, America has written us a check that is marked insufficient funds, and that we need to have that check made whole. That is reparations talk. And that is, quote, revolutionary economic talk. And you're going to start seeing a whole new look at that. I was just talking to officials in Family Search and the Roots group that's popularized by LDS Church, where people are searching their family trees. And in Black history, you will remember that there were about 4 million slaves that were set free. The names of most of them have been put on a disc and donated at the National African American Museum. And of those 4 million people, They set up, do you know that to show you that the white man will tolerate almost anything except ultimate control of the money. They wouldn't accept the nickels and dimes and dollars and quarters that blacks had saved from the plantation, wouldn't even accept their money to be deposited in the bank. So Congress set up the Freedmen's Bank, almost 450,000 approximate Black families set up bank accounts and deposit accounts. And they were so preoccupied with documenting and maintaining control, they would ask a prospective depositor, what is your life story? What plantation did you come from? Were you ever married? Did you have children? Do you know their names? Da, 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 da. So those records, which are in the National Archives, of the 450,000 bank books, do you know that it's estimated that 1 out of every 3 African Americans that was born in America, not those that migrated here, but those who are ancestors or can trace their roots back, they can trace their family roots to those bank books. Now, they deposited more than $57 million in a bank that was controlled and commissioned by Congress. Martin Luther King would say the ultimate responsibility for that blank check. So who did they loan the money to? They loaned the money to a lot of white corporations and white individuals. How much did they pay back? 0. That bank was declared bankrupt, and Frederick Douglass was called in. His wealth, his personal wealth, he would have been considered the Oprah Winfrey of the day. His personal wealth was used to try to save the bank. And after 3 months or so, it collapsed. And then they blamed it on him, even though he had nothing to do with the loans that were being made. And they didn't pay it back. And there are some corporations existing today that borrowed money that never paid it back. So you don't have to wait for reparations.
Can you name names? Corporate names?
Well, Northern Pacific Railroad and several insurance companies. But the point that I wanted to make on that is that that is the Congress's responsibility. So Martin Luther King would be asking the Congressional Black Caucus to ask Congress to do the modern version of FDIC, which is Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and pay back those heirs and family members who had a bank account. Well, when I traced my family tree, I went up to the Mormon temple and went through the records. I found out that one of my relatives had a $200 bank account in the bank in Georgia and one in Mississippi. So I think that King would make the connection, the continuum of Black history to how we are going back in time to a period of plantation era politics. And that's what I think King would say about the level of discrimination and why we need to vote, why we need to volunteer, why we need to vaccinate, the 3 V's. King would say we need to stay vigilant and continue on.
Vote, volunteer.
Vote, volunteer, and vaccinate. And we can have victory that way.
Vote, volunteer, and vaccinate. Right on.
And vindication, as my wife says. We can have vindication.
Vaccinate and vindicate. That's 4. Yeah. Vote, volunteer.
That's 4. Yeah. What?
Hey, you pointed out something that I think could lead to a very real occurrence later this year. The Georgia Bulldogs are the national champions in college football. 16 of the players are already off to the NFL draft, which means they're going to have to replenish. And if it comes to pass that voting rights are blocked yet again, you could see Georgia being used, the university football team, as a high-profile kind of skyscraper saying, we're not going to allow this. right?
Yep.
That's an incredible development, Paul.
Yeah, yeah. The Georgia football players or the parents thereof could ask the question, why should we make you number one when the people across the street from the stadium will be arrested if they gave somebody a bottle of water to drink after standing in line for 6 hours to vote? And furthermore, why should we have to stand in 6 hours to vote? Why shouldn't it be 6 minutes like white folks? You know, they're going to start asking those basic fundamental questions, and the challenges are going to happen when people see the disparity that is that great. You will see the challenge coming from this generation.
Of Stacey Abrams, what do you think her role will be in all of this from your perspective?
I think that Stacey Abrams can help usher in a wave of consciousness, what I consider intergenerational and intersectional consciousness. She has a unique ability because of her emphasis and her grasp of technology, the numbers and data. She's able to speak multilingually across the board to excite a lot of people on the importance of inclusion in the voting process. Her model should be replicated around the country and throughout the country. She's like, in terms of political style, she's more from the Obama generation, but in terms of being articulate, she's much more persuasive in her ability to get over. And I hope that Black girl magic works for her, that she becomes the governor, because I think she can make tremendous changes, because in the media, where a lot of impressions are given, she can hold her on more effectively almost than any other politician. She's quick-witted. She has a great non-offensive rejoinder to any troublesome issue that is put before her. And she's got an instinct towards a kind of interracial diplomacy that makes her message, her style, her verbiage, and her impression as an ideal candidate.
Hey, Paul, how are we doing on time from your perspective? Because this is incredible. But because I have another question, how would Dr. King regard the pandemic from a biblical perspective? What would he say about the pandemic and what we're going through if he were still alive?
Well, when you say perspective on the pandemic, you mean whether he would classify it as a plague in biblical terminology, or would he talk about it in terms of preventive care and what we should do to save life? And whether, I guess it raises the question, is going to be the ethical challenge of the bioethics question, whether we trust science, how much of it's science, how do we interpret biblically? I guess I would start with render to Caesar the things that are Caesar, which is also a philosophical rationale for voting. You know, we need to vote. We live in this democratic society where voting is the currency of existence. So we ought to be current rich and participate in those things. In terms of defense, it makes sense to say that if we say we should not take the vaccine or we should not participate in what Dr. Fauci says about masking and distance and hand washing, then the issue is, well, then why do we get the polio shot? Why do we get a shot for mumps and measles and all the other diseases and that are out there? So I think that King would raise the question of, yes, we should be vaccinated. Yes, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and the civil rights groups and the NAACP and others, we should be demanding our fair share of equal care, access to hospital, national health assurances, and insurance. and so I think that King would be on that side.
That is beyond what I think any other media organization could present, Paul.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
No, I think the King would be on the side of survival.
No, I'll tell you what I mean, because it's a good question. What I was thinking about as I was listening to you is our 2008 conversation and how that was history making, and how you're quite neatly following up on that in a way that I could not have dreamt of.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, in one word, it can be summed up as wow.
Yeah. And also, you should consider King was a minister. If King were preaching here in Oakland, at a church in Oakland, he would raise the question that, is it good to protect our children? Does God want us to keep them healthy? Are vaccinations used to prevent childhood diseases? Yes. If so, then he that knoweth to do good and doeth it not shall be beaten with many stripes, or is considered a fool. So King would challenge the clergy to speak up, to make demands for equal and adequate health care. King would say we should ask our white churches, our white Christian brothers, what does Jesus say to the man whose back is against the wall? He would be quoting Howard Thurman, and with that challenge of Jesus and the dispossessed. So, and that is reflective in health policy. We need a re-education, re-immersion, and a re-baptism of that approach towards that old-time religion from our present-day clergy to reach out to our people to be woke from in that perspective.
It sounds like you're sending a special message to Senator Raphael Warnock as well, who's running for re-election, although his challenger is Herschel Walker. But I'm sorry, it's whatever. But you're giving him a special set of walking orders or marching orders, it would seem, yes?
Well, I think that Warnock comes from a great tradition. I think that because Stacey Abrams is running simultaneously. I used to live in Georgia, just like you live there now, when I worked for Julian Bond, and I was active with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference folk back in the day, and working in Maynard Jackson's campaign, the first Black mayor. I think that because Stacey Abrams is running, it's going to attract even more national attention than Warnock, which means that the overflow, the outflow, and the inflow of volunteers is going to have a dramatic effect on turnout. So all those running on the slate with Warnock can help bring Warnock to the table. And we should be sending money to Georgia. We should be, as Gladys Knight would say, we should get on that midnight train to Georgia and help them get the vote out. Because the symbolism and the participation, and the reason why it's so important, and this is one of the things I've been talking to some of the rappers around here lately, I'm trying to get them to rap out a song and a message to urge this generation not to be so nihilistic or fatalistic in their public messaging and to say don't vote. Because that was one of the mistakes that I think some of the people in Black Lives Matter made when they were challenging Hillary, saying and sent out the message, well, I'm not too sure voting really matters. That's a dangerous message, because I think that there was a direct connection to that kind of rapper's negative, downcast message, gangster rap anger that might be justified from the societal conditions to tell people not to vote. 11,000 votes in Detroit, 21,000 votes in Milwaukee, and about 50,000 votes in Philadelphia. if we had done our part and voted our strength, Trump never would have been president. We would have had a different Supreme Court. We would have, we still would have struggled. It wouldn't have gotten rid of racism, but it would have prevented the wolf from being closer to the door.
I want to add to what you're saying real quick. I had an argument with a DirecTV guy back then in 2016 who was telling me, Black, why he shouldn't vote. And this is in California. So the point is that, and it's a random worker who came by to repair my DirecTV connection. And I, implored him not to think that way because it was not going to get us where we, needed to go. But you're absolutely right, Paul. Had that not happened, I do believe we would have been on a different and a healthier course. We would have had Hillary Clinton as president, and who knows what else,
Yeah.
You're absolutely right. We've been on for a solid hour, almost. Paul, we could talk for another hour. I'm going to have you back. But folks, this is epic. One thing I want you all to do is play the 14-year-old conversation we had here, and then this one back to back with a nice cup of your favorite beverage, warm because it's cold, and get a lesson in American culture and how we've advanced through the years, or not, through the eyes of this great man who I'm privileged to know, as well as his wife and all the people that have been involved with the Oakland Post.
Well, do you know that, in closing, I'd like to give a tip of the hat. I didn't know her then. My wife marched in the March on Washington, and she was there. I didn't go to the March on Washington, but she did. She also, she was a Queens College student, and she was one of the early Freedom Riders that came out of New York to go south and participate in integrating lunch counters and fighting for public accommodation.
My mom was raising me, and I was born August 4th, 1962.
Oh, so you're in August. I was born in August 18th.
Yeah, so you're a couple of Leos, figures.
Yeah, well, that explains the problems that we're having here in communicating.
And my mom and my late father, rest in peace, owned a 2-flat, as they call it, in Chicago at 7427 Wentworth, and a Lincoln and a Cadillac, are doing exceptionally well. And they were part of the class that you and Gay and others are part of, what I consider to be the true greatest generation. And what I mean by that is the first professional class of African Americans who really enjoyed the fruits of the culture as much as there was racism and the pains that we talk about. But it was the emergence of, we were just watching the movie with Sidney Poitier and Paul Newman in 1961, Joanne Woodward and Diane Carroll. That was on TV1 just before this. And of course, Sidney died a week ago, it seems. Time passes too quickly. Mm-hmm. And you have too many people, too many African Americans. My mom was part of a generation of African Americans who were hired by United Airlines to be reservation sales and professional class. Mm-hmm. It's never talked about, Paul, because that group, your group, my mom's group, the same group, that the greatest generation, not only had to suffer discrimination in America, but also went in the military and just, suffered discrimination there, went to Vietnam, came out. It's a story that's not told, not talked about. And yet I believe the remnants of that gigantic cultural revolution, not talked about, are with us today when someone says to me, hey, you talk like a white person. And I get that now. And it's a rise of that kind of rhetoric among us that I really detest. because it says I'm saying to me, wait a minute, you're saying I'm supposed to talk like a second-class citizen? I am one person, right? I don't have that discussion. I just ignore it. But it is particularly acute here in the South. And my point is, we should remember that this country is as much ours as anybody else's. If you're born here, this is your country. This goes into, having democracy, voting, and everything else that we're talking about. But to have this rhetoric that I, as a Black person, should not speak the way that I do, I'm sorry. That is completely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think?
Well, I think that the challenge, as Booker T. Washington and George Washington Carver used to say, we should drop down our bucket where we are. You and I, here on this broadcast, on this taping, and on this medium, we're representative of the media. There are a lot of Blacks in the country now have gotten involved and have integrated the digital platforms and understand how to communicate. Some for good, some for entertainment, and some for bad, but they understand the technology. There are 50,000 Black houses of worship. There are hundreds of Black educational institutions. There are thousands of Black nonprofit organizations that are working for advancement and improvement and progress for and with Blacks and with others. There are a lot of fraternities and sororities and social clubs. We need to figure out how, as an amalgam, to use that energy and that creativity to reach across all of those communities of interest from a perspective of a cultural phenomenon of us mobilizing to help ourselves, to pool our resources, to share solutions, and to focus on solving the problem.
Paul, that's the last word right there. And I want to thank Joseph Bisman, longtime Zennie62 follower, for chiming in with his takes as well. And we got to do this again, Paul. We had that original idea. You know who I think we should try to get on that, to do that idea that you and I were talking about?
Who's that?
Senator Warnock.
Yeah.
That's classic, or Stacey Abrams, or both, something like that,
There's some Oakland residents. We had an Oakland enclave in Atlanta. There's some Oakland residents who are down there now and who are active volunteers in those movements still. I don't know if you remember the great Ivy Brothers restaurants and so forth. Well, Benny Ivy, who worked for the King Center, she's still living in Atlanta. And Carol Ward Allen, who used to be on the BART board, she now lives in Atlanta. So all of you Oaklanders ought to get together and form the senior citizens version of Oakland's black activists that are making an Atlanta impression. And also,
I'm not ready to be a senior citizen yet.
You say what? Yes, you're senior.
I'm not ready to be
and you may not be ready, but age is creeping up on you. But Ryan Glover, who is the
30.
Ryan Glover, who is the son of the late Rudy Glover, who used to live across the street from me, is the executive director of Bounce TV in Atlanta. And there are others that are there. So we need to link up our resources. And the other thing, I have to say this, I know what Dr. King would say. Today in Colleyville, where we had this hostage taking, and I discovered from watching the news that there's a secure network that all the mosques, all the synagogues and various Jewish organizations are connected nationwide on alert and on drills on how to protect themselves in situations like this. We need to do the same thing in conjunction with them around the 50,000 Black houses of worship, because who gets attacked whenever there's racial stress.
Right.
Black churches.
Right.
Which religious organizations suffer the brickbats and the danger of racism? Black churches. That could be the basis of a unique coalition of interests where we have a common bond of survival and concern. We should be to each other's houses of worship as Dan and Bethel were in the Bible. Cities of refuge, we should protect houses of worship as refuge sites. So I know Dr. King would make that kind of appeal across the board to an interdenominational audience. So I think you and I in the media ought to proliferate those kind of solution-oriented messages that get out there to punctuate and to proliferate in the firmament of thought around these issues.
All well said, and thank you so very much.
Thank you, Zennie.
You got it. Hey, Paul, stick around in the background, everybody. Hey, folks, tomorrow at 3 o'clock Pacific, 6 o'clock Eastern, I will have another legendary guest, Lee Steinberg, friend, sports agent.
The sports agent from the Bay Area, yeah.
Yeah. Used to have a house on 140 Panoramic in Berkeley up there. You know Lee? You know Lee,
I
right?
met him, yes.
Yeah. Boy, you two in
I
one.
met him through Arif Khatib of the Afro-American Sports Hall of Fame.
Hey, tell Arif to return my phone calls, please.
I will. I'll tell him. Since you've embarrassed him now on the national media, I'll definitely tell him.
Well, he keeps saying, well, I tried to call you and all this stuff. And I'm like, well, so yeah, I got my shot.
All right.
Stick around in the background, folks. We'll see you, folks. Again, thank you, Paul. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Zennie.
Thank you. Stick around in the background, Paul. Thank you.
Okay.
That ends this broadcast.